With engineering, I see this year's failure as next year's opportunity to try again. Failures are not something to be avoided. You want them to happen as quickly as possible so that you can progress quickly. Gordon Moore. Hello class, today I come to talk about a little of the history of Intel. Well, Intel Corporation is the first company of microprocessor in the world. It is the largest manufacturer of integrated circuits, this according to their annual business figures. It was founded in 1968 by Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce, who initially wanted to call the company Moore Noise, but it sounded bad because it sounded like more noise, which in Spanish means más ruido. For this reason, they choose by name the acronyms of Integrated Electronic Corporation, Intel Corporation. A common mistake is that the people think Intel comes from the word intelligence, but it doesn't. Just starting with the company, they had problems with the name of the brand, because this belonged to a hotel chain. The matter was later fixed with the purchase of this. Its headquarters are in Santa Clara, California, with large facilities also in America, Europe, and Asia. The company started out manufacturing memories before making the leap to microprocessors. Until the 70s, they were leader thanks to the competitive market for DRAM, SRAM, and ROM memories. In November 1971, they released their first microprocessor, the Intel 4004, to facilitate the design of a calculator. Instead of having to design several integrated circuits for each part of the calculator, they designed one that, according to a program stored in memory, could do some actions or others. That is a microprocessor.
In many ways, 1968 is famous for its tragedies, assassinations, conflicts, and war. But 1968 also gave birth to something amazing, the era of fast, cheap, ubiquitous electronics. Because 50 years ago, this past week, two middle-aged engineers quit their jobs to start a new company called Intel.
In 1968, Gordon Moore dropped by Bob Noyce's house. Bob was mowing the lawn. They were discussing the state of their current jobs, as well as the possibility of a new industry.
Elizabeth Jones is Intel's archivist. She runs the Intel Museum in Santa Clara, California.
And apparently Bob said, yeah, that's a good idea.
He did, and on July 18, 1968, Intel was incorporated.
At his previous company, Fairchild Semiconductor, Noyce had co-invented the integrated circuit, a way to etch all the circuits in that era's room-sized computers onto a tiny slice of silicon.
We have Intel's first product. It's a memory chip called the 3101.
Okay, and before that, how did they make memory?
It's this larger device up on top called core memory.
Smaller also meant faster and easier to make. This plant near Portland, Oregon, one of Intel's oldest, is what a chip factory looks like today. No TV crew has ever been allowed inside before.
Do you have this in a khaki?
No, I'm sorry.
Aisha Evans, Intel's chief strategy officer, showed me how to put on the so-called bunny suit. That's her on the left.
I did take a thorough shower this morning. Why was all this necessary?
We want maximum purity as the material is being assembled.
Each shiny round sheet of silicon fits about 500 identical chips, which will be cut apart and installed into the microprocessors, the electronic brains, that control just about everything in our lives with an on switch. Each chip is etched with impossibly small channels of circuitry, only 10 millionths of an inch wide.
And so, who gets to etch those tiny, is it some little Swiss watchmaker with a magnifying glass?
Robots.
So how would you say the making of silicon chips has changed in 50 years?
You know what? The basic principles and fundamentals haven't changed at all. Just a lot more automation, a lot more complexity, and also more layers.
I see. And that's to get more circuitry into less space.
That's exactly right.
Getting more circuitry into less space is the whole point of Moore's Law. That's Gordon Moore's prediction, way back in 1965, that we'd be able to double the amount of circuitry, meaning power and memory, that can be crammed onto a chip about every year and a half. He's basically been right for all 50 years.
The 4004 was capable of 60,000 operations per second. Seeing its success, Intel continued to investigate in the field and shortly after released the 8008, which its main advantage over other models, like the Intel 4004, was being able to access more memory and process 8 bits. Its clock speed reached 740 kHz. It was the beginning of high speed. Intel was incorporated into devices in gas stations, airports, arcades, restaurants, hospitals. In April 1974, they launched the Intel 8080. Its clock speed reached 2 MHz, allowing 16 bits addressing, and 8 bits data bus, and easy access to 64 kilobytes of memory. Then, Intel announced that long-awaited first personal computer, named Altair by the ship Enterprise from the popular television series Star Trek. This computer had a cost of $400 at the time, and the processor supposed to multiply the performance of the previous one by 10, thanks to this 2 MHz speed with a 64 kilobytes memory. However, the personal computer didn't become such until the appearance of IBM on the market. This happened in 1978. In 1981, Intel developed the Intel 8086 and 8088 processors, 16 bits and 8 bits data bus, both with the same set of instructions. IBM selects the 8088 for its IBM PC, and this creates the huge market for the compatible IBM PC. This was the first time that IBM turned to a third-party manufacturer. The success was such that Intel was named by Fortune as one of the best businesses of the 70s. Of the two processors, the most powerful was the 8086 with a 16 bits bus, 5, 8, and 10 MHz clock speeds, 29,000 transistors using 3-micron technology, and up to a maximum of 1 mega of addressable memory. As for the 8088 processor, it was the same, except for the difference that it had an 8-bit bus instead of 16, being cheaper and obtaining better support in the market. In 1982, the revolutionary Intel 8286 appeared, equipped with 184,000 transistors and the first to offer software compatibility with its predecessors. The famous 286 with a speed between 6 and 25 MHz and a design much closer to current microprocessors. As the mainly novelty, it's worth highlighting the fact that the so-called virtual memory could finally be used, which in the case of the 286 could reach up to 1 giga. In 1986 came the Intel 8386, a 32-bit micro and 275,000 transistors that was quickly adopted by Compaq for its personal computer, the Compaq Desk Pro 386, with a clock speed between 16 and 40 MHz, and it stood out mainly for being a microprocessor with 32-bit architecture. It should also be noted that the production of 8386 microprocessors has continued until now, and Intel stated in 2006 that it will finally finish producing them in September 2007. It seems that this microprocessor is still widely used for embedded systems today. In 1989, the robust Intel 8486DX with 1.2 million transistors appeared, again with 32 bits technology. Due to a judicial ruling at the time that prohibited the name of brands with numbers, the next microprocessor to be launched in May 1993 was known as Pentium, full of new standards and transistors and with 5 times more capacity than the 486. These processors, which started from an initial speed of 60 MHz, have reached 200 MHz, something that no one had been able to predict a few years before. In 1995, the Pentium Pro processor gave network servers and workstations a new look, just as it happened with the Pentium in the home environment. The power of this processor was unmatched until then, thanks to the 64-bit architecture and the use of a revolutionary technology such as 32 microns, which allowed the inclusion of 5.5 million transistors inside. By now, Intel processors were so well known, famous, and widely used that the public often referred to a computer model by the name of its Intel processor. Phrases like "I bought a Pentium 2" were embedded in popular culture. In May 1997, the Intel Pentium 2 appeared. A year later, the Pentium 2 Xeon, after which the Intel Pentium 3 would arrive. Intel dominates the microprocessor market. One of Intel's main competitors in the market has been Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, a company with which Intel had technology sharing agreements. For example, each partner could use the other patented technological innovations of the other part at no cost. In 2005, Intel reached an agreement with Apple Computer, whereby Intel will provide processors for Apple computers between 2006 and 2007. Finally, in January 2006, the first computers, a laptop and a desktop with dual-core Intel Core Duo processors were introduced to the market. In 2010, Intel announced 2 major acquisitions. Announced that they planned to buy McAfee, a computer security software company whose best known product is McAfee VirusScan Antivirus. Less than 2 weeks later, the company announced the acquisition of Infineon Technologies Wireless Solutions business. With this purchase, Intel plans to use the company's technology in laptops, smartphones, netbooks, tablets, and the computers embedded in consumer products, eventually integrating its wireless modem into Intel's silicon chips. After approving the McAfee offer, Intel's workforce amounts to about 90,000 people, including approximately 12,000 software engineers. In 2009, Intel had a big problem because the European Union fined $1.85 billion because it threatened all computer manufacturers to eliminate discounts if they didn't buy almost all or all of the chips they needed, which will delay the launch of computers with AMD microprocessors, and paid Media Saturn Holding to sell only computers with Intel processors. In 2020, the XA graphics architecture debuted, specifically starting in September with the presentation of the Tiger Lake laptop processors. Intel is the inventor of the x86 series of microprocessors, which are found in all PCs. and today it is one of the largest and most valuable semiconductor chip manufacturer in the world.